So what I'd like to open with, this is session 6, our final session, and the scripture verse that is familiar to all of us: "Blessed are the peacemakers; they shall be recognized as children of God." I'd like to share a recent daily devotional by Richard Rohr. This is an excerpt from Tuesday, February 6th. Many Christians support the violent, unjust Israeli occupation of Palestine. We name a missile that is clearly meant for destruction of human lives a peacekeeper. I could list many other examples. The peace we are keeping is a false peace. Jeremiah the prophet would say to our peacekeeping wars what he said to the leaders of Israel: "Peace, peace, whereas there is no peace. They should be ashamed of their loathsome deeds. Not they. They feel no shame. They do not even know how to blush." Jeremiah 8, verses 11 and 12. Do we have any idea of all the slavery and oppression, all the killing, the torture, all the millions of people who have existed around the edges of every empire, so those at the center of the empire could say they had peace? Every time we build a pyramid, certain people at the top will have their peace, yet there will be bloody bodies upon which their security is built. Those at the top are usually blind to the price of their false peace. War is a means of seeking control, not a means of seeking peace. Pax Romana is the world's way of seeking control and calling it peace. In ancient times, the citizens who lived in the city of Rome thought they had peace. Violence, you see, will always create more violence. It is not real peace. As Pope Paul VI reflected, if you want peace, work for justice. John Deere, an internationally known voice for peace and nonviolence, says that as Christians, we cannot support war, participate in war, pay for war, promote war, or wage war. It is our responsibility to end war and create peace, to be a peacemaker. How can we be peacemakers? It begins by being peace ourselves, by connecting with the source of peace within. It means standing up in nonviolent resistance to systems of injustice. It involves learning the skills of nonviolent communication and conflict resolution. So the reason why I brought this into today's session is we're going to walk through and see a number of very inspiring examples of people who had to make a decision to pursue justice for the goal of resolution of peace, when it was not the easiest alternative for them. As a matter of fact, a number of the individuals actually, maybe without a lot of forethought, had chosen war and violence first and came to the conclusion on their journey about becoming a peacemaker. So our session tonight will be focusing on activism. And here are the questions that we'll go through and explore. Number one, examples of Israeli and Jewish initiatives supporting justice and peace. How do Palestinians promote nonviolent activism? Other initiatives internationally and then in the U.S. What are the challenges activists face? And what do the Palestinian people seek from us? And when I say us, this is largely internationally, but much of it is from the United States. Internationally, application, but some unique to us. So when we talk about nonviolent activism, and this is a picture of me on my assignment with a little girl named Sarah, or who we would, in English, would be Sarah. And this is a sign in a museum in Bethlehem, a museum that's basically sponsored by an English philanthropist. And what unites human beings is huge and wonderful. What divides human beings is small and mean. And again, this is a secular museum. But just to focus that the polarization in our own society, and certainly the polarization between Israel and Palestine, we don't seem to get this. We spend I mean, again, there's really no difference between Israel, Palestine, or the U.S. culture today. The polarization that we gravitate to in terms of choosing what news media outlets, whether it's television or internet or newspapers and magazine subscriptions, which ones do we choose that are pretty much reaffirming filters that we have versus which ones we don't choose? I mean, it's all tailored that way. There are multiple choices in terms of what we would call left versus right. But we have all those choices, and we seem to, and I'll be speaking for myself, but I think a lot of us would identify with this. We seem to gravitate to those that think like us, agree with us, and maybe even look like us. And we have to realize that as human beings, there's more that unites us than divides us. And let me just give an anecdote that I've repeated a couple times now that just occurred late last week. A family member of mine who's definitely supportive of what I've been involved in, I've been talking to them about possibly a speaking engagement. And the person, again, a dear family member, said, I've been struggling to tell you this, Mike, but the leadership in this organization that I was talking to him about, possibly speaking at, he said, I've been struggling for a while to tell you this, but the leadership of this organization is pro-Israel. Well, number one, that gave me pause to say, well, am I giving vibes that I'm anti-Israel and pro-Palestinian? And I tried to share with him that actually the satisfying engagements I've been involved is when there's diverse views. And I firmly believe the polarization in our culture will just continue to intensify if we're not engaging respectfully, lovingly with people that have different views than us, that look different than us, that think different than us. That's the only way we're going to resolve polarization and focus that we are all humans, and we're good-hearted people, and there's much more we have in common than that we have that divides us or that we have different opinions on. So some examples about Israeli activism or joint activism. The first one being Other Voice. This is Eric. Eric is a Jewish American who, as a child, his family moved to Israel and he was raised in a kibbutz. His parents have moved back to the United States. He has a sister that moved back to the United States. Actually, I think a brother too. Eric's the only one that stayed in Israel and is there for good. He married a woman who was born and raised in Israel, and he has two sons, one of whom is is just old enough with the mandatory draft and is part of the Israeli Defense Force today. Eric has a small tech business and lives in Sderot. Now, we talked about Sderot. Sderot is the closest Israel city to Gaza. This is the village that once a rocket from Gaza is launched, it takes 15 seconds to land in Sderot. Alarm goes off, you have 15 seconds to find a safe place. Eric he and his wife raised their family in Sderot. They're part of an urban kibbutz there. There are people in his kibbutz that are agree with Eric's views, and there's people in his kibbutz that don't. But Eric and a few other people from Sderot started a grassroots organization called Other Voice. They came to the determination, even though they have lived through bombings, even though they're in bomb shelters that sometimes for days on end when there's war between Israel and Gaza, they came to the conclusion that nothing was changing from a political standpoint and decided that they were going to start a grassroots organization that would promote a peaceful resolution. But they were Israelis on one side of the siege from Gaza, so they contacted individuals in Gaza and find it like-minded people who, again, Palestinians, who wanted a peaceful resolution to the conflict. And so whenever they have a meeting, which is about once a month, they the Israelis group together face to face, and they have a conference call with the Gazans who are part of Other Voice. And the first part of the meeting is, how's it going? What's life over in your town in Gaza like? What's going on your side? Are you getting more support, less support? How are you holding up? Same thing with the Israelis sharing. And then they talk about initiatives that they have. They have a website. They go talk. They've had some campaigns to disavow any kind of violent activity, either from the Palestinian or the Israeli military side, and promote that they need a peaceful resolution. That they're wanting the affirmation of Palestinians to have freedom, as well as Israel to have security. Eric, in addition to Other Voice, again, he's an American Jewish Israeli citizen, but he has, along with a couple of Palestinians in the West Bank, have co-sponsored leadership programs for people like Tariq from Al-Maher. Tariq was the 23-year-old English major working part-time and representing his family. Eric and I, Eric's leading a tour of a delegation of us. That's Gaza in the background, and we're on a hillside right outside of Sderot city limits. But I had the pleasure of Eric, being a Jew, partaking in a Ramadan iftar meal with the Muslims at Al-Maher. Eric, his wife, myself, and a few of my colleagues were hosted by Tariq's family, the Hathleen clan, for an iftar, and had the pleasure of getting to know Eric a bit better. So Eric is one of my heroes, basically, what he's chosen to do here. If you met Eric right now and he was in here, he still has an American accent. He acts like he's some sort of California dude, etc. Very laid back, would fit in any kind of American setting. And yet he and his wife, who's from Israel, and live in this little town, who are not totally all thinking like Eric, have chosen to do this. He actually has family members, like his oldest son, that disagree somewhat on this. So he lives and breathes this aspect of diversity, but yet commitment to what he believes is the truth. Tayush, these are people that are like weekend ecumenical accompaniers. These are people who live in Israel, but dedicate at least a couple, 3 weekends a month to go over to the West Bank and do accompaniment. This is Michaela, or I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, basically the Hebrew name for Michelle, and 2 other Israeli college students. This is a Saturday. This is a Palestinian girl, and we're having like a picnic snack break where we're accompanying the Palestinians that have that soccer game up near an Israeli settlement. It's owned by the Palestinians, but there's a land action clause that if the Palestinians aren't using their land for any purpose, and it's dormant for any length of time, Israelis can go to court and say, okay, this land it's owned by somebody, but it's not being used for anything. We can take it over because it's right next to a settlement. So they go play soccer regularly to establish that they're using the land. And we accompany them because during the soccer game, there's 2 or 3 military vehicles with soldiers there watching the soccer game because they were called out by the settlers to be security for the settlement against the soccer game of kids playing soccer. So anyway, it sounds ludicrous, but nonetheless, we're there with Tayush. Tayush also accompanies shepherds that have been harassed. And again, they are Israeli citizens, all Jews, who have YouTube videos disavowing any kind of occupation and violence against the Palestinians. And then this group that you saw a few times ago, Breaking the Silence, we showed videos before, and in the session guide, there's a link to their page. This is a woman who one of her nicknames is Murphy. I might have mentioned her before, but I'll just reiterate it. Murphy is a former soldier in the Israeli Defense Force. She served in the Civil Authority, which that name sounds like it's not military, but the Civil Authority in the West Bank is basically staffed by soldiers. And the Civil Authority is the group that oversees the soldiers that are providing security for the settlement. So she, along with others, had their testimony published and on the website for Breaking Silence. And here she's leading a tour of Hebron, describing the H1, H2 that we talked about, the issues and the tension between the Jewish settlers and the Palestinians, and where Palestinian shops were closed to create a buffer zone between the settlement and the rest of Hebron. Any questions or comments on these examples? Okay. Other initiatives, B'Tselem, again in the session guide, there's information on the web about their website. A lot of current information about human rights abuses in the territories. They also have activists in various locations that are on staff with B'Tselem, and so if they're linked with the UN as well, but they have on their site they'll have information about, again, both Jewish and Israeli as well as West Bank incidents about where rockets have demolished a home, injured somebody, or killed somebody from Hamas violent initiatives, or initiatives that have been either settlers or Israeli military against the West Bank. They document everything. They're against any kind of violence and human rights abuses. J Street is actually a U.S. organization. This is a Jewish organization that they would consider themselves moderate. And so here's another term. Jewish organizations that self-identify as moderate would be viewed by right-wing Jewish organization as being pretty left, because J Street is very pro-Israel in terms of Israel being a state, but very critical of Israel in terms of any kind of violent aggression toward Palestine. They they very much believe in justice and a peaceful resolution, and face a lot of consequences based from other organizations. And so at times, some right-wing organizations would call J Street, I don't know if this is a term you've heard before, self-hating Jews, a Jew that is critical of Israel. At times will be called a self-hating Jews because, it's unfortunate because these people identify themselves very much from a Jewish perspective. I'm sorry about that. From a Jewish perspective. So it gets into this polarization when you hear terms like that. Jewish Voice for Peace. I just got off a phone with a colleague up in Raleigh, Sue Woodling, who's a Lutheran up there, and I cannot remember the name of her representative, but her representative recently gave an audience for an hour. This is her U.S. representative in Raleigh. There's an organized group of Jewish Voice for Peace up in Raleigh who works interfaith with a number of other denominations, including Lutherans. But Sue was a Lutheran, along with Jewish Voice for Peace and other Christians, that met with an hour with their representative who's considering co-sponsoring a bill to be pro-Palestine in terms of some of the backlash with regard to boycott, divestiture, and sanctions with Israel. So think about this. A Jewish Voice for Peace, again, Jews who are accused of being self-hating, and many of them are observant Jews. I know a young woman that is very active in her Reformed synagogue up in Chapel Hill area that's part of this group. Are very, very connected, politically minded, and had a very good meeting with their representative from North Carolina. Now, and I'm not trying to diss any of our representatives. We've had discussions with our current representative, John Hudson. He's very, very open and respectful. I would say he's trying to balance things between Israel and Palestine, but understands there's economic consequences in West Bank that he feels should be resolved for import-export and things of that nature. Another little anecdote about Jewish Voice for Peace that we did not cover in terms of before this. Israel has and I don't know the name of it, but they have a funded initiative whereby they invite police officers, mostly chief of police, but other leaders of different municipalities, to come over to Israel for basically all expenses paid and train with their police force as it relates to anti-terrorism and crowd control. So, and this is active around the United States. Well, the reason why I'm bringing that up, and I'll go back to it in a minute, but the Jewish Voice for Peace organization is very much against that and is trying to make municipalities aware of what this program is and what the agenda really is about. Because obviously they do go over and they learn techniques. They learn the newest technology and approaches with regard to crowd control and terrorism. But they also come away with Israel's message about how their filter, Israel's filter and policies as it relates to Israel and Palestine. So you have all these municipality leaders coming back to the United States, being sort of listening and maybe buying into the rationale as to the military control, etc. So Jewish Voice for Peace are very much against this program and seek audiences with chief of police and mayors, etc., to basically try to dissuade organizations around the United States for going on that program.
So do any of these Jewish organizations, activist organizations in Israel, do they face any harassment by those who, so to what degree?
So, back to, I'm sorry, I'm going the wrong way. Back to not Michelle or Michaela, but another person that I talked to at length and met a couple times because we crossed paths 2 or 3 times and we had some time to spare. I was talking to him, and he basically doesn't, he said, I think in my neighborhood, one person in my neighborhood knows what I do every Saturday. I keep it under wraps. My wife and immediate family know. We don't bring it up much. I don't even think his wife supports him in doing it. He's about our age, this guy. He's got grown kids. 1 or 2 are in the U.S. These college students, again, they don't broadcast it among their friends at school. So the way Tayush deals with it, I think, is okay. It's like 2 or 3 Saturdays a month, and I'm part of this group, and this is what I want to do, but I try not to broadcast what I'm doing on those days. People just don't, closest to me probably know, but nobody else hardly knows. So I'm not saying that's the rule of everybody in Tayush, but it was the people I came across said that.
So they're more concerned just about being harassed, or could they, any legal action? Could they be arrested for?
Right. It's probably the former, because they go across the border with their passports every time. And so the Israeli government knows if they want to look into it, they know. They have records of movement of everybody going across that border. So they can't hide from an authority. And the government can't prevent them from going in unless they have a proof of them, some sort of insurrection or bad light of Israel. So as long as they're just coming over and doing stuff and not getting into trouble, they're okay. So it's more of a social thing than I think a political thing in terms of that. Murphy can hide, and breaking the silence, and the other group we're going to be talking about, if you ever, and I'm not implying you need to, Breaking the Silence, if you Googled Breaking the Silence, what would come up is their website and other things, and then you'd see other things coming up from Jerusalem Post or other news articles where authorities are saying this group is semi-treasonous. There are people in the current government that question the authenticity of some of their testimonies, and basically their not only their veracity, but also then say, okay, well, these people are almost insurrectionists. You know, they're trying. They're going after the military. You know, if you think going after the military, criticizing the flag in the United States, this is like a whole nother degree. Their country and their military. Back to this thing about security and the safe places. You go after Israel's military, and that is like this close to the line of being an anarchist or an insurrectionist. So having military folks, them and Combatants for Peace that we're going to talk about. Eric, I don't think, I never heard him say anything that he has any concerns about it. Obviously, people know what he's doing, and Sederot's not a big place, but he seems to be okay, or the business he has isn't dependent upon it, and he's just doing what he feels he needs to do. It's a good question, though. So Combatants for Peace. I'm going to show the trailer of a DVD documentary that we have available for checkout here at St. John's Library. And it's an excellent production, but you'll get a sense of it, and we'll talk about it after the trailer. So Disturbing the Peace, hopefully you got the gist there that there were both Israelis and Palestinians. So the first person that talked, who said he was a little boy in Tel Aviv, and that I think it was because of his family from the Holocaust, came to Israel and the start of it as a country. And his view were Palestinians, why do they want to kill us? He served in the West Bank and came to the conclusion, along with the other Israeli soldiers that had joined Disturbing the Peace, that this is not what he had intended to sign up for. He's pro-Israel, he's pro-military. If Syria invaded Israel, he would be eager to serve in the military and defend his country. When he served in the West Bank, what he saw at the checkpoints, etc., was, as I said earlier, this is not what he signed up for. This is not what he wanted to do. And he came out and said, I'm against the occupation. So what occurred was, before the institution of this group, Combatants for Peace, he and a number of other former Israeli Defense Force military came to the same conclusion in terms of their service in the West Bank and against Gaza, that they disavowed any kind of military violence against Palestine. That group got some press, were considered fairly controversial in Israel, got some press. There were, at the same time, there were a few Palestinians who were part of this trailer who had served a prison term. And why did they serve prison term? One of the individuals that was in here attempted to kill 2 Israelis. He severely wounded one and went to prison. When he was in prison, he came to terms that violence wasn't the right way, and decided to, when he got out, to promote a peaceful resolution or peaceful resistance to the occupation. He came across a couple people that came to the same conclusion. The woman who said she decided to be a suicide bomber, in the film, she talks about having, I think, a girl about 5 or 6. She's a single mom, and with her girl at 5 or 6, she decides the only hope, the best thing she can do as a mom is become a suicide bomber. Now, that might seem somewhat bizarre to us, but if you have time to see the whole documentary, she says goodbye to her little girl, goes out. Israeli military had got wind of the initiative and arrested her before she could carry out her mission. She was imprisoned, and she comes to the terms of moving from a violent approach to a peaceful approach based on her discussions with a Jewish prison guard, a woman, whose brother had been killed. And the prison guard starts talking to the Palestinian woman and saying, I don't hate you. I'm against violence, and I know you're here, but I don't hate you. She was so thrown to hear that an Israeli Jewish prison guard who had her brother killed by a Palestinian didn't have any animosity toward her, that it shook her to the core, and she changed into pursuing a peaceful resolution. That's a long-winded way of saying these two groups were independent. Once the Palestinian group heard about the Israeli controversy, that's when they invited them to come to Bet Jala, which is outside Bethlehem in the West Bank, to start this discussion. What has resulted from that discussion is not only this documentary and a website and some other materials, but whenever they go speak, whatever events they have, their policy is always to have an Israeli member and a Palestinian member side by side. Now, these people don't necessarily agree on the solution in terms of a one-state solution or a two-state solution or the settlements or whatever. But what they do agree on is no violent means, and there should be peaceful resolution. So anyway, Combatants for Peace is a great initiative. A lot of grassroots activity, Combatants for Peace, Tayosh, Other Voice, all these grassroots organizations. And there's a lot of even smaller grassroots activity that I've come across, and I've probably just am aware of the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. Over here, we have actually some international authors, including from the U.S. The person you can't see that's over here in a white fedora, that's Michael Chabon, the Pulitzer Prize-winning author. That he and his wife were co-editors of the book, Kingdoms of Olive and Ash. And they formed a group of those international authors, one of whom I read from, the African-American author who went over, and everybody was marveling at her afro, and she made the association between Palestinian children deaths and Black Lives Matter issues. Well, they're planting trees at Susia near the school. These are olive trees that they're planting. Susia was featured in the book in a few of the chapters, and they were making a book tour rounds in both Israel and the West Bank when the book was released last year. Again, back to our discussion about Palestinian Arab, Christian Israeli citizen. Another combination that Palestinians very much get is trying to engage diverse groups. So here we have a Jewish woman, not from Israel, I think she's from Finland. Her boyfriend is a Palestinian Muslim. This woman is a colleague of mine from Switzerland in the ecumenical company. And this is a Palestinian Muslim who lives in this area. What we're all doing here is there are caves that are Palestinian-owned, but they haven't been inhabited for a while, and we're digging out and cleaning the caves for he and part of his extended family to move into. It's an area in the firing zone that Israel would say no one's allowed to live in, but the Palestinians, from an activism standpoint, wanted to raise awareness and say, okay, this is Palestinian private land. Can we have a family that's willing to move back here? They have proof of ownership of it, and to basically move in here as a form of nonviolent resistance that will get some publicity, because the Israeli soldiers, the civil authority in the West Bank don't want anybody to live there, even though it's owned by Palestine. So they're looking for areas to promote awareness, and so nonviolent resistance doesn't mean just sitting back and letting Israel's policies continue. Nonviolent resistance could be and is things like this, going into an area that's rightfully yours and establishing presence. And here is where I lived in Yatta. This person's name's Khalil. I got to know Khalil very well. He's a dress shop owner in Yatta, and I apologize for the clarity here. He gave me a little parting gift, and it says here, Palestine wishes peace to the world. And what he did was went to a print shop and created this. This is an image of the United States. He highlighted North Carolina, and in the background is the U.S. flag and the Palestinian flag. And let me read a few things about Khalil that I wanted to share. And I told him I'd share it as part of my awareness building. So as I said, Khalil and I became pretty close. He became close with another colleague too. I visited Khalil on my off time at his shop. It was very hospitable, probably about 3 or 4 times. He's originally from Yatta. He has a wife and 3 children. And here's a couple questions and answers that go on from a conversation I had with him. What does Ramadan mean to you? And this is Khalil's response. It makes a good man. It helps me succeed, helps me build patience and compassion for the poor. When you can eat and drink, you develop compassion for the poor who are hungry. My primary goal is paradise and closeness to God, so I read the Quran more, and I want to improve tolerance and love for others. I want to be a good man and not make problems for others. Probably a good takeaway for all of us during Lent right now. Why did God create people? To worship the one God and serve one another. Use the land, God's creation. A simple life is a good life. What are your dreams for your children? I would like them to be in service careers to help people, perhaps medicine or law. Most important, I want them to be happy. Then they will be successful. What about Judaism, Christianity, and Islam? I don't care about different religions. I care about humans. God created Muslim, Jewish, and Christian. God and each person to work out their own relationship. It's not my job to change others, only to love them. God deals with all people, good or not good. Any person making a problem in the name of God is not following Islam. People who create problems for others are not true Muslims. A person who makes a problem, it's on him and not on a religion. I like to find like-minded people. Differences among loving, peaceful people is not a problem. No matter what differences we have, there are many common things we share with each other. What are your thoughts about the occupation? This life is all about God. If God has me in occupation, I want to learn what God is saying to me. He is perfectly wise. People of any country can choose to live happy. If someone lives in a country without occupation, why do they still get angry? In the West Bank, a single person doesn't have influence. The occupation does impact options, but independence is a state of mind focusing on God. People with or without religion can act as victims of government. You need to figure out what you can change in yourself instead of others. I respect the wisdom of life by learning from my seniors. So again, I'll just talk personally. Much of what I read there, I would feel inspired and think that it's probably something from a Christian periodical or magazine. I would have not have guessed that would be from someone who practices Islam. That's my personal confession. So what you have are good-hearted people, very similar to us, espousing the same ideals and disespousing what we typically hear about, unfortunately, incidents occurring in Palestine. Before we move on, any questions or comments? A little bit more background about Khalil. Okay? Now, we talked about Christian presence before, and this should look familiar because we already talked about these points. But the reason I'm bringing this back up is one item we didn't have time for that really relates more to activism as much as it does to Christianity, is a video that I'd like to share here from ACT Palestine. So, international initiatives. World Council of Churches, one of the programs is the EAPPI program that I'll be talking about in just a minute. United Nations, the Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. You might have noticed throughout the course there have been a few statistics or activities that I presented from that organization. They have a lot of good infographics in terms of maps. They would be the organization that we would report incidents to. When I said we would report to the United Nations, it was staff people that were proximate to YADA as part of this coordination of humanitarian affairs. Operation Dove is an Italian organization very similar to the World Council of Churches, focused on accompaniment. Christian Peacemakers, which is an international organization, again, is very similar to that. Mentioned last time, Bright Stars of Bethlehem and their website. They're sponsoring the photo exhibit that we're having next month. That's the 501c3 in the U.S. that represents Mitri Raheb's ministries with Dar al-Kalimal University in Bethlehem. Peace Not Walls, again, was another website I pointed out, the ELCA campaign. So Peace Not Walls within the ELCA, they're working for the youth gathering every year, or every time there's a youth gathering, there's specifics about raising awareness between Israel and Palestine, the conflict there, as well as Bishop Yunan, who we saw just in this last video. He's actually in the United States right now touring and speaking, and ELCA has sponsored that. He's going to a lot of Lutheran colleges across the North and the Midwest, speaking for the next few months. And we're going to get back to the Black Palestinian solidarity, or the solidarity between Black Lives Matter and Palestinian, in just a minute. Okay, so the ecumenical accompaniment program in Palestine and Israel, I mentioned this in the very beginning, 6 sessions ago or so. So let me just refresh this. There's over 20 countries that participate in this. It began by church leaders like Bishop Yunan approaching the World Council of Churches and asking for a program for some level of protective presence. And what arose then is that the countries that are supporting us vet, train, and provide representatives from their countries to serve 3 months. It corresponds to the calendar quarter in East Jerusalem or 6 different sites in the West Bank. Purpose of the initiative is to provide protective presence, live life, realize experiences there, and then there's a 2-year commitment following the 3-month assignment to go back to your native country and do awareness building. This course is part of my commitment, but I've spoken at in other venues as well, and will continue for the next year and a half. And so I'm instilling, I have still access to the EAPPI hub, so I can keep current on where I was assigned and all the current events or current situations in all the towns, villages in South Hebron Hills. I'm also, was it WhatsApp, the app anyway, all the colleagues that were part of my field assignment from all over the world, we continue to be in correspondence about what we're doing and lifting up each other and supporting each other. So it's a great experience. I'd highly recommend it to anyone that had the opportunity and freedom to spend 3 months away from home and loved ones. I'm going to show you a brief video that sort of encapsulates. When I mentioned about cleaning out the caves at Sahara, there's a picture, this is a photo up. Our tools to clean out the cave were a shovel, a pick, and these buckets. So there was a bucket brigade. It was a pretty slow-moving process. This is Al-Maher that we talked about before, the settlement over here. And this is a delegation of Lutheran church staff from around the United States, people of color that came there. And here's a colleague where we're taking some children to school past some military outposts of Israeli soldiers. So actually there were, I don't know if you realize this or not, but some familiar people that we've mentioned before. Eid, the man that was the younger man that was talking at the end, he's Tarek's cousin. The older man at the very end with the ruffled gray hair and the grizzled beard, that's Solomon, Tarek's uncle. So Al-Maher was featured in that. And then Susia was also featured in that in terms of some of the South Hebron Hills. So U.S. aid, again, just to be very clear and due diligence, through our federal funds, there's a lot that is provided for in the West Bank. U.S. aid is specifically for schools and healthcare primarily. They provided a $2 million subsidy to Dar al-Kalima that was their newest addition in terms of their library. You'll go across the West Bank and you'll see U.S. aid signs. And so here's some facts. Since 2011, 18 Area C infrastructure projects, 11 schools, 6 clinics, etc. U.S. aid, I'll visualize this. We've seen it three times, that Bethlehem checkpoint, checkpoint 300 with that long passageway, the gated stuff. It looks pretty bleak. Before that, there was no passageway. It was just like a mob up at the very top of the gate. U.S. aid actually built that passageway. So actually how bleak it looks and how horrible with the people checking in, or trying to jump in the line, et cetera. It was worse before. And that was that infrastructure along the wall was part of U.S. federal subsidy. They help farmers, and current projects are down here, building additional schools and rehabilitate highway. I mentioned Black Lives Matter, and I think we have time. We respect time, I'll cut it short, but this is worth looking at in terms of, here's a theme that I personally have embraced because it happens all the time with me. When I see them, I see us. So when we were talking and got deep dive on Israel and Palestine, much of what we've talked about, if it hasn't been apparent for you, I'd be happy to explain my view on this, but much of what the conflict is about over there, we can extrapolate to conflicts over here in the U.S., whether it's the Parkland shooting and tragedies with deaths due to automatic weapons or semi-automatic weapons, or marginalization of minorities. But so here's one viewpoint or vantage point about solidarity between U.S. African Americans and Palestinians. So with that, you might have noticed a few celebrities: Danny Glover, Aya Angela Davis. I'm sorry, not Aya Maja. Angela Davis, and then the guy is a boxing promoter. I can't remember his name, but anyway, he was part of it as well. And I know Angela Davis. I mean, she's comes with a strong history of black activism, but she's been over to the West Bank, and her comment was that she went over with a delegation from South Africa, and they were both amazed about the military presence in West Bank with automatic weapons. that even during the height of the apartheid in South Africa, it wasn't as militarized as it is in the West Bank. I think I've shown this before, and this is Christmas Lutheran Church, where Mitri Rahab used to be pastor. He's retired there and now giving full time to Dar al-Kalima, which is not on the campus of the church, but here's a poster in Old City, Bethlehem, again, promoting from an activism standpoint and providing hope opportunities. Challenges activists face was asked earlier. From a Palestinian standpoint, lack of awareness. This is back to the EAPI program. Come and live and then go and tell. Bureaucracy, just the whole process with government and trying to apply for things and actually having to work outside the system. Choosing to be having that as a form of a resistance. Normalization and apathy. This gets back to the theme of the two Israeli citizens at Tel Aviv on the beach. It's like, I'm over here. I wish I could drive over to Gaza and have a latte or a piece of cake. I wish I had highways like all across international Europe. But if we don't, we don't. It's funding. Money's a big issue. Harassment and threats, and then hopelessness. Because basically, the longer it goes, and I've talked to people over there that are very engaged in nonviolent, that were part of the EAPI film that we just saw. Eid, Tariq, the grandfather that's my age. They all have other voices in their heads now that it's gone on for 50 years. Are we foolish? Should we be doing something different? So we pray that they don't, but there's not only voices in their heads, but there's other people who have chosen violent paths. And sometimes they look and they say, well, is that what we're supposed to be doing? So hopelessness is always a danger. What do they seek from us? It really is the same core aspect of the EAPPI program. They seek from us awareness. Now, we don't necessarily have to go, but we have to come and see. We have to open up and look at things that are happening, investigate, and get a little bit more information, and then go and tell. Because in many instances, they cannot. Mitri Rahab, when he's asked what Christians can do, his standard answer, the answer that he comes up with earlier, the 4 Ps from the standpoint of what Christians can do. Pray, project support, which means financial support or being active in promoting projects like the photo exhibit. Pilgrimage, if you have the means and opportunity, go over and see the authentic aspect. And particularly for not just Americans, but particularly another thing here that he's well aware in any democratic society is get engaged as you feel comfortable in terms of a political focus, because there is this political aspect of activism that needs to be, Palestine needs to have a voice in. So this is what we've covered in the 6 sessions. The whole historical pattern that has culpability on both sides, how Israelis and Palestinians view the same event differently and focus on different events. The whole aspect of how religion has been played and at times viewed as a myth in terms of it's about religion. It's really about land, and at times religion has been used to sort of go backwards to build a rationale about the land. And whether that's from a godly standpoint of inclusivity versus exclusivity. We've certainly spent a lot of time, hopefully, on life in Palestine and how the issues of safety and dignity and security versus dignity and freedom impact lives over there, and how violence derail any kind of peaceful resolution or reconciliation. And then the hope, a lot of from the standpoint of Christian presence, and then the actives is what we close today. So the last thing I want to just point out and leave you with is that when we talk about Israel-Palestine conflict, it first has to focus on justice. And so we have the Arabic, the Hebrew, and the English word for justice. And only through justice are we going to find a true and lasting peace shalom and salam and peace. Thank you for your attention, and peace be with all of you.